Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today at the beautiful Smith Square Hall. My name is Mia. I'm a producer at Intelligence Squared, and I'm delighted to be bringing you this very special panel on tackling the question, can Britain become an AI superpower? Now, this is the first installment of the Intelligence Squared Economic Outlook for this year, and as always, we're delighted to be partnered with Guinness Global Investors on this series. Now, for those of you who don't know, Guinness Global Investors is an independent British fund manager that helps individuals and institutions harness the drivers of future growth to reach their investment goals. With specialisms in Asia, sustainability, innovation, and income investing, they offer funds for the core of any equity portfolio. So if you'd like to find out more, just talk to your financial advisor or have a look at their website. But for now, I hope you'll join me in giving a warm round of applause for your host this evening, BBC broadcaster Johnny Diamond.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Hello and welcome to this Intelligence Squared event. I am Johnny Diamond, and I'm delighted to be sitting down with two brilliant people to discuss this question, can Britain become an AI superpower? Before I introduce them, just a very quick word about the structure of the evening. We will chat for about half an hour. We'll then want to get your opinion on what you see as the key obstacles towards successful adoption of AI and increasing AI investment in this country. And then we'll discuss your thoughts, your priorities for another half hour. That'll take us to about 8 o'clock. At 8 o'clock, we'll take your questions, and we'll have people with microphones roaming the hall, and we'll put your questions to Katie and Greg, and then there will be a final poll to see how much or how little the words of Greg and Katie have affected your thinking right at the end of the evening. We have Greg Williams with us. He was until recently the editor-in-chief of Wired UK and deputy global editorial director of Wired. He now is taking up a new role in the tech sector that has yet to be clarified. It's the great mystery of the evening. Whilst in journalism, he won a clutch of awards. He was chair of the 2026 Orwell Prize for Journalism and has interviewed enough bigwigs to keep anyone satisfied for a very long time. Katie Prescott is technology and business editor at The Times and an award-winning columnist for the newspaper's business section. She is a former colleague of mine at the BBC and much missed, and used to present the business news on the Today programme. She was tech commentator of the year at the 2024 UK Tech Awards, and she has her own podcast along with Danny Fortson of the Sunday Times, reflecting on the technology worlds on both sides of the Atlantic. So those are our guests. They will, you'll be relieved to know, do most of the talking this evening. The question, I suppose, at the top of my mind is why are we talking about a small, damp island off the edge of continental Europe as an AI superpower? There's been a little bit of discussion as to the ranking of Britain. It is described as the third largest AI market globally, some distance, it has to be said, beneath US and China. Last year, major US tech firms pledged tens of billions of dollars, pounds worth rather, of investment in the UK. And Nvidia's Jensen Huang has predicted the country will become an AI superpower. The roots of it, of course, Alan Turing, Jeff Hinton, Demis Hassabis, Mustafa Suleyman, who guest edited the Today programme over Christmas, a fascinating edition. We have world-class research facilities, major AI companies, and a huge number of AI startups. We are here to discuss problems, but also potential and solutions here tonight. How Britain can build on the opportunity, what the government can do, what it is doing to make AI a pivotal part of the UK economy. I want to start with that phrase, AI superpower, and see what both of you think it means. Katie.
I'm so glad you raised the UK being third in the world for AI, because it's one of those phrases that gets trotted out time and time again in government press releases. And we were speaking about it before we came on stage and realized that none of us quite knew exactly why the UK got that third ranking. And I think it's to do with the value of the AI companies here. But I think it also says a lot about how we're on the cusp of being that superpower. And I kind of hate that word because it feels, just like a sort of nonsensical phrase. But essentially, you named a lot of people there who are AI godfathers, leaders in the field. We have exceptional talent in Britain when it comes to AI. We have extraordinary universities and amazing scientists. We have some brilliant companies, and we're very, very good at starting businesses, less good at growing them, and we can talk about that a bit later. What we don't have here, and I think what is holding us back from being an AI superpower, is much AI physical infrastructure. And by that, I'm talking about data centers, semiconductors, really the hardware that AI is built on. So we have a lot of the ingredients to make this superpower cake, for want of a better word, but there are still some things that are holding us back.
Greg, do you want to address the idea of AI superpower?
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting idea, but I think also it kind of like suggests that, that there's this kind of winners and losers around AI, which I think is a really interesting concept. Look, the AI revolution is happening. It's going to affect every single aspect of our lives. It's affecting already, we're seeing sort of like productivity gains in all kinds of areas across every kind of industries. It's general purpose technology, so, it's like electricity or whatever, it's going to impact everything. And I do think that, I think Katie's absolutely right. We have unbelievable talent in this country. We have 4 of the 10 top universities in the entire world, many more if you dig into the top 30. We have enormous amounts of capital. It doesn't rival that, the US, but we are very good, as Katie pointed out, at sort of like that early stage investment. And I'm sure we can get into areas where we can kind of talk about scaling. But I think there are like 2 or 3 areas where we do have kind of like really strong advantages. One, we're just really, really good at innovation in this country. We are fantastically good at it per capita. We're probably better than the United States even. And our ROI on our businesses from venture capital is as good as what Silicon Valley produces. I also think that we have this kind of real sense of mission in the UK around the fact that we have a global outlook. I also think that, we are able to dig into like vast treasure troves of data that simply isn't accessible to anyone else. We're talking about this sort of like the building of the National Data Library, which the government has announced as part of the AI Opportunities Action Plan. And, we are uniquely placed in areas like healthcare to really drive innovation, to think about, we have the world's largest depository of genomic information in the UK Biobank, like 500,000 decoded pieces of DNA. So there are many advantages, and I think that, the UK is good at many, many things. We're also very, very good at talking ourselves down. And I think that we need to sort of really seize the moment and think that we have strategic advantages, we have capital, and we have like a brains trust. And we do have, I think, and this is, something that we've had, prime ministers and governments thinking about since Theresa May, really kind of like governments that are trying to drive policy in this country that does drive, innovation and supports entrepreneurs. So,
Katie.
Perhaps there's a danger as well, because we're both tech journalists, of thinking of this very much from that perspective, how you create AI. But I think also being an AI superpower is about how we use it across the board. And we've got incredible strengths in this country, for example, in financial services, in the law, you mentioned healthcare. So I think it's also about how we roll out this extraordinary technology and how we deploy it.
Okay, which leads us seamlessly onto the next question. I want to come to what the government's been doing and
Sure.
your views on that. But I guess it's a little bit of crystal ball. How would you see AI being used to its best effect in the next, say, 25 years in this country? What will have changed in this country vis-a-vis AI, its use and its development, that would make you think, yes, we went down the right path? You're giving me that look as that's a stupid question. You'll never be able to answer it. Go on, give us a try.
I don't think it's stupid at all, but there are already some uses in government that are moving the dials. So, for example, the government's rolled out a tool called Humphrey, based after the Yes Minister character, which has reduced the number of people and the amount of time it takes to go through policy consultations. So when they ask the public, businesses, what they think of a new policy, and people come back with information. They used to have to pay individuals to sift through that, and now they can use AI. I talked about healthcare there. I mean, if you look at a discipline like radiology and the application of AI for scanning, it can be more reliable actually to use a computer to look through information that doesn't get tired or have a stop button than it can be a person. So I really think it's going to be transformational,
Greg,
and is already starting to be.
You mentioned, Greg, that the sort of lack of, I think it was the lack of hardware, the data centers, etc. Again, spin forward 25 years, can you be an AI superpower without that hardware on your territory?
Look, I think Katie and I are seasoned enough tech journalists to know that we do not look 25 years ahead.
25
we probably
minutes.
can't even look 25 days ahead at the moment. But what I would say to you is that Katie is absolutely right when she sort of like pointed out the infrastructure challenge. So what the AI opportunities action plan is like laid out is that we need to increase compute by 20x by 2030, and that is quite a punchy goal. We'll need to really think about how we provide the energy for that, which, we were talking earlier, like that is such a huge issue, not just for the UK, but globally, but particularly for the UK. We need to bring in planning laws where we can build data centers with energy infrastructure next to them. At the moment, as far as I understand, the AI action, I'm just going to call it the National AI Plan, because I can't kind of keep repeating that same phrase, is thinking about situating data centers next to sources of kind of like abundant energy. So in the north of England, and there's one in Oxford next to a National Fusion Centre, building out that sort of like data capability. And also I think what's really important is that we have to be able to build trust around AI. And I think that there is still a bit of a gap there. All the sort of like latest sort of public opinion polls suggest that people are worried about jobs, they're worried about safety, they're worried about privacy. So we have to be able to point to like enormous UK success stories like the UK Biobank, where there have been no data breaches, 500,000 genomic samples, and then no data breaches. And then to Katie's point, looking at sort of like very clear success stories. Huddersfield Hospital now can do a radiology scan that can identify lung cancer far more accurately than human eye can in 7 seconds. So those kinds of wins, people need to feel like they can trust AI, and they need to experience it in ways that are positive for them.
Katie, again, without the hardware, can you be an AI superpower?
It's a brilliant question. It's one of the things that Jensen Huang, the boss of Nvidia, so the world's most valuable company that makes the AI chips, brought up last year. He said the UK is the only AI superpower that doesn't have infrastructure. I think it becomes a problem when you're talking about very sensitive information that you would probably want to store in the UK. So when it comes to healthcare, when it comes to defense, when you need, because essentially what data centers store is data, right? And if you don't want to put that on foreign soil, then it is an issue. The UK has a problem. We are very small. Our energy infrastructure is already creaking. The rise of AI is coinciding with the rise of electrification of cars. And so the pressure on the national grid is absolutely massive. And the boss of the national grid keeps coming out and sort of squeaking about it, actually, because it's such a problem. I've come across all sorts of ideas that people have had for making data centers possible in the UK, including putting them in space and also building them around waste disposal centers. So you're using the energy of basically landfill sites to power data centers. I mean, that's how desperate people are at the moment. And also, all this stuff takes a long time to build. So as you said, the government's put planning changes in place, but you can't just throw up a data center in a few months.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, it takes, I think, talk to Greg Jackson at Octopus, and I think it takes around, he can build, he said to me once, he can build an offshore wind, power plant, whatever you want to call it, offshore wind center in a year, but it takes 7 to connect it to the grid. And that's the kind of challenge that we have, or opportunity that we have. But I just wanted to come back to sort of like that idea that you were discussing around that, data. And I think that there's a real opportunity for the UK to think about sort of like sovereign AI, where we have governance over this, and we have regulation around it. That, and I know that there's a big conversation, and maybe Johnny, you want to get into it, around sort of what regulation should look like in the UK. But if the UK becomes a kind of like a trusted place where AI is built, and there's maybe a UK AI kite mark where there are standards, where there's global governance, there's this governance that's recognized globally, that's another opportunity for the UK, because I think, despite the fact that, we've maybe shot ourselves in the foot in terms of like our global reputation in 2016. There's still, I think, an opportunity for the UK to sort of like demonstrate sort of like global leadership in this area by showing that we can have governance that is trusted but at the same time sort of like ensures that we are attracting companies here that want to innovate.
Okay, well, look, it was the Prime Minister's pledge to make Britain an AI superpower. Can you directly address how the people you talk to feel the government is doing? Katie?
Pretty negatively, actually. There was a lot of irritation around the budget in I would say, the entrepreneurial community as a whole, but especially in tech, a sense that they didn't quite know the direction of travel. I think there's a sense that the focus from government has been on innovation within the public sector rather than promoting AI companies themselves and the AI startup ecosystem in the UK. And certainly there's been a bit of irritation around taxation. I mean, again, that probably sort of businesses across the board, but when, news broke that Nick Storonsky, the boss of Revolut, was living in Dubai, Herman Narula has moved out there, the CEO of Improbable. I particularly actually ahead of the budget, less so afterwards, heard about a number of entrepreneurs who were thinking about moving on tax concerns. So, but that's all anecdotal.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, because I think you can look at that also as that there have been sort of like global shifts, right? So, Asia now, Dubai sort of like is much more sort of like central to sort of like those growing markets, and Revolut clearly is trying to get a banking license in the Gulf. It makes sense for Finnick to be there. Worth pointing out that he's just invested £3 billion in the UK, and Revolut's headquarters is still here in the UK. I would point to sort of look, government's slow. I would look to the fact that maybe there have been some changes that hopefully will have an effect further down the line. So, for instance, the fact that the Treasury is now working with the Mansion House Group to ensure that we invest from pension funds in the UK. So I think they're going to raise around 100 million from local government pensions, and also from direct contribution pensions. Other kind of like acts other pieces of legislation that encourage investment into the UK, R&D also, tax credits on R&D. So it's always slow. Government is, I think, trying. The infrastructure thing is a real challenge. The energy thing is a real challenge. But if we can kind of keep, building up on that sort of like that data infrastructure, then I think that we'll see a lot of companies that are able to build on that application layer.
It's very easy, isn't it, as well, to blame the government of the day. But I think there's also an element of sort of it was ever thus in the British tech world. So I've just written a book about Mike Lynch, the tech entrepreneur who founded his business in the 1990s. And a lot of the research I did just showed that so much of the things we complain about, the fact that British businesses get to a certain size and sell out to America, the fact that it is very, very hard to find funding at a certain point in a business's growth here in the UK, haven't really changed. And so I don't think that's necessarily a sort of today's government issue. And
I was in Germany last week, and they're having exactly the same conversation. They're like, why can't we build a global player? Why can't we build a fund that is a fund of funds? And it's exactly the same conversation that's going in Germany. I would say that the German government has just invested 1 trillion euros, I think, or maybe it's dollars, forgive me for not knowing the exact number, 1 trillion in reindustrialization Germany, particularly around the defense sector. And I think we haven't really touched on this yet as the opportunity, but like one of the great things that I think we can hopefully do is we can bring about more, and I know you want to touch on geopolitics, Johnny, but like one thing that I think is really important is like we're putting in place, hopefully the government will put in place industrial policy that makes the UK more secure, because we're living in incredibly, uncertain and difficult times.
Can I ask you both, and we're going to come to the poll in a moment about your thoughts on what might be holding AI back, but before we get to that, briefly to touch on the revolution that is happening in geopolitics, in particular, a question which I think very few people would have thought we would ask, perhaps up until a year ago, which is whether we can trust the United States and whether the US government is still to be classed indisputably as an ally, and what you think that means for, sorry, that sort of vast word, tech and AI. Katie?
I think it's absolutely terrifying. And as you say, a year ago, maybe more, we would never have considered the idea that the US government might put pressure on big tech companies to stop their services. And more, particularly from Europe, this is being considered in the corridors of power. People are really, really worried. To the extent, actually, that the president of Microsoft, who's a guy called Brad Smith, that is known as the ambassador of Silicon Valley, he's a bit of a sort of diplomatic chap, lawyer by trade, did a press conference with us last year, and he gathered all the tech journalists together, and he said, look, even if we are pressured by the White House, we will still continue our services. And that is absolutely unprecedented. Now, you look at what's happened with Greenland this week, and you look at the tariffs that Trump is threatening, actually probably the biggest lever he's got to pull is over technology. So I think something like 80% of our cloud here in the UK is hosted by Microsoft and Amazon, and then 10% is hosted by Google. And that's all of your banks and hospitals and all that sort of stuff. That's absolutely vital critical infrastructure. With the special relationship in the past, we would not have been so concerned, I think, about our dependence on US tech companies. But regardless of what Brad Smith says, people really are. And so particularly in Europe at the moment, they're trying to push for digital sovereignty. France is the only country in Europe which has a frontier AI company, so essentially the equivalent of OpenAI. It's a business called Mistral. It is far, far smaller than OpenAI or Anthropic in America. We don't have one here, by the way. And they're making hay really off this sort of sovereignty issue that the European Union is trying to find ways to decrease its reliance on big tech. And it's terrifying but fascinating to watch.
Yeah, I think the Mistral example is a really good one, and they are basically the French champion, and the French government have kind of like effectively underwritten that company. And maybe that's the kind of it would be very, very contentious in the UK, but maybe that's the kind of bold move we need to see. I mean, to answer your question, Johnny, I think it's pretty clear that yes, times are uncertain, but I think we know, because J.D. Vance has told us last year at the Munich Security Conference exactly what the United States' intentions are towards Europe, and that's effectively sort of like the United States has given up on multilateralism. Like that era is over. So I think that what we have to do is like build partnerships with almost like a coalition of the willing outside of the US. We are still dependent on them. You're absolutely right, but the terms of those agreements that we have with them, I think, have to be sort of like co-locating data, ensuring that like R&D talent is UK local talent, ensuring that all of our infrastructure is critical national infrastructure, and we have to sort of like determine that when we have those companies in our ecosystem, that technology is being used to create indigenous technology rather than simply be a taker. We need to be a maker.
Okay, I want to hear from the audience now, and it is the first poll of our evening. You can see the QR code up on the screens there. If you point your devices at that, the question is, what do you think is the biggest obstacle to the UK fulfilling its potential with AI? Your options are the brain drain, energy costs, regulation and red tape, and the AI bubble, which we all will discuss. There may be, of course, headings there that you would have put on that we have not. I don't know if there is anything there. Again, that question, whilst people are voting, the biggest obstacle to the UK fulfilling its potential with AI. Is there something missing there? It's too late to put it on the list. I should say that.
Can you run through them again,
Do
Johnny?
vote.
Energy, talent, brain drain.
Brain drain, energy, regulation, and the bubble itself. I mean, let's ignore for the fact that Donald Trump appears to be pivoting away, to say the least, from Europe.
What would you say is the least worrying, Katie?
Brain drain.
Me too.
I put a question mark over that.
You can't queer the voting. Everyone's still deciding. Right.
I wasn't sure what the rules were.
We have some answers. Don't all run away from brain drain. Just because Katie and Greg have said it's fine. Right. You can see the answers ahead. I don't know if our guests can there. Regulation and red tape. Up top, energy costs, brain drain, and the AI bubble. A little bit of bopping around with the numbers there that you can see. Let's start with regulation and red tape. Katie, it's double-edged, isn't it? Because if you're talking about sovereign AI, then that is about the regulations that you want to lay down and creating what Greg was talking about, sort of a safe space, a space that people trust, maybe a standard that can be adopted globally. But at the same time, you have sort of titans of the industry saying, get out of our way, get out of our way. Can you take regulation and red tape away from
They would say that, wouldn't they? I mean, I think when it comes to tech, in general, we are really crap at regulation and we tend to be running to catch up after the event, as we've seen with social media. I think with AI, actually, Britain's doing a really cool job. We're sort of in the, Goldilocks just right territory. If you think the US is basically doing nothing, and Europe has got quite strict regulation on AI, we've decided to outsource it to our regulators. So, for example, Ofcom is responsible for regulating AI for the media. And the Financial Conduct Authority, same for financial services. The idea being that the regulators know their space, and if you're talking about financial services or maybe health, you want to be a bit more restrictive than in other areas. But it is a really fast developing area, and I think where it's most difficult is, as mentioned, in America. Obviously, that's where the biggest AI companies are, and often here in the UK, we're trying to regulate their behavior. And for example, the Competition and Markets Authority is trying to do that in competition and sometimes struggling. Ofcom, we've seen quite publicly having to deal with everything with Grok over the last couple of weeks has been difficult. They've got an investigation going on, but, as my colleague in Silicon Valley said, that's classic you Brits. You just publish a white paper and then a green paper or whatever. So it's complicated. But I think we're in quite a good place here, actually.
Right. Greg, can I ask you Katie mentions, and it's been discussed in other quarters as well, the lack of regulation in the US. This is of a technology that we are told may well surpass our own intelligence, may well be able to replicate, may well be able to remove itself from our control. Does it concern you at all that the people who are leading the charge have the least in the way of guardrails?
I had a meeting with someone last year, weirdly, exactly a year ago in Davos, who was from a research group into AI, and he sat and wept. And he said, I'm so scared. I'm so worried. Meanwhile, on the other hand, he literally wept in a hotel lobby. On the other hand, you have people who are saying, there is no risk, this is all fine. And I think what Katie is saying is absolutely right. The UK has actually done a really good job on regulating. What the EU is doing is they're just regulating the technology, right? They're not looking at use cases. And what we're doing is we're looking at the application of the technology, and that is exactly the right approach. Now, we have to think that there are bad actors in the world. We already can see that our information sphere has been completely polluted by bad actors And, so many metrics demonstrate that we are being polarized, we're being turned against each other. And I think that, we can all talk about sort of, robots running amok and all these kinds of scenarios. But I think we are actually seeing it in real time right now on our social media platforms. And I think that while, we need to think very carefully about the way that we regulate AI and in the coming years, and certainly I think I 100% agree that kind of with Katie around the kind of the whole sandboxing in the UK, which allows us, I think, an advantage, because if we can say that this is trusted AI, it allows us to sell it all over the world with a kite mark on it. But I would also suggest that we need to be, we are so late to saving our information sphere. That's actually the thing I'm more worried about.
We were so worried about the safe side of it, and you talked about robots running amok, that Britain hosted the first AI safety summit in Bletchley Park in 2023, just a year after ChatGPT was launched. And then the word safety was quietly taken out of the next event. But I think what's actually worrying me more than that kind of thing, and maybe the superpowers of AI, is actually what it's done to perhaps more boring things, but really important things like copyright. Yeah. If you look at the eradication and the destruction of the media industry because of the theft of information by AI companies and our lack of ability to regulate that, it's crazy. So we had a legal case here between Stability AI, which has an engine that creates pictures, and Getty Images. And Getty essentially lost that. Yeah. The New York Times is suing Microsoft and OpenAI in the US over the theft of their copyright. And maybe something will then come out of that court case when it does come to court in a few years' time. But at the moment, it seems to me, we haven't resolved that. And it's a massive, massive issue.
I agree. And I think that the pressure is being put on creators to, quote, opt out. And I think that is something that, it's almost impossible to opt out, right, of these things.
We had the UK's AI minister at the time at the Times Tech Summit in 2024, I think, and she said on stage, this will be sorted out by the end of the year, and, we're 2026, and it still is nowhere near being resolved. I mean, the last thing I heard about it was that basically everyone in the room who was looking at it just was shouting at one another. And
also, like, there's, we talk about sort of like UK growth, right? And the creative industries are our superpower. There's no, we're great at financial services, we're great at so many things. We are great at exporting culture. And if those people have their, economic incentives removed, and, they have their copyright infringed constantly, and they have their content stolen, and I'm sure that, you two are both journalists, pretty much everything you've ever written has been scraped by a bot.
Is there such a thing, this comes down to regulation and red tape, as sovereign AI? I mean, do you have sovereignty over how AI is used within a territory? Or because of the nature of the beast and its global reach and its lack of individual sovereignty, is it impossible?
It's such a good point. I think it's really hard with tech, isn't it, and services to put those sort of guardrails in place. But yes, I think if you are America, you can have sovereignty over your tech. And I noticed, actually, during the state visit, a lot of the big investments from the US tech companies were made through a brand new UK business called Nscale.
Yeah.
You noticed that, the data center business, which I wondered if it was to try and create that sort of air of sovereignty. But I think it's very difficult if a company is headquartered somewhere and then its services used somewhere else to create totally sovereign AI.
Can we go to number 2, and energy costs? It feels rather prosaic after all the discussion of global regulation, but it's critically important, isn't it? I mean, and this is across business, obviously, but for energy-hungry data centers, do they work in a country like ours where energy is so expensive? Greg?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think this is all tied up to the kind of like the energy transition as well. So I think that they've what's it called, the AI Energy Council, and it's DCIT and Department of Energy and Net Zero. now have kind of like a combined sort of like working group where they're attempting to ensure that all data centers are located in places with abundant energy. I think the US does have an enormous advantage here because they are energy independent. What I would sort of like suggest though is that, you know, we do have sources. I mean, okay, some of the growth that the US AI companies are suggesting is entirely dependent on building out vast amounts of energy infrastructure. You look at sort of like OpenAI, that for them to get to where they claim they will be by 2030 in terms of like the revenue they need to generate, they would need to build like 250 nuclear reactors. It's such a huge challenge, such a huge ask. So I think that almost kind of like bleeds into the kind of like the bubble question, which is those valuations. So the valuations, as far as I understand them at the moment, would suggest that there will be 3 trillion to 5 trillion additional gains in productivity in terms of dollars. That is insane. That's like 20% of the US energy infrastructure right now. So the idea that this is sort of something that is, you know, easy to do, or, you know, something that is just can be signed off on a, you know, a note of, you know, understanding. This is hard stuff to do. Now, we have seen sort of some build outs. There's the Stargate project in Texas, I think, is one of the ones that's actually been built out. Meta's talking about building out this vast computer data center, a data center in Louisiana. But like the actual kind of physical deployment of this stuff is really, really hard. And those skills are very, very different from the skills that it takes to actually build a model. So, you know, whether we see a bubble, whether there's a bit of froth or whether this is actually a bubble, I don't know. But I certainly think that that energy and that bubble question are related.
Okay, let's try and keep them separate, slightly separate for the moment. I mean, that fundamental point, if you have energy as expensive as Britain's is, does it make the data centers, the hardware that you were talking about earlier, does it make them prohibitively expensive? Or?
Absolutely.
But it just can't be done.
It's really, I don't know if it can't be done because they're trying, so the governments are trying to change policy to make it more accessible. But certainly when I speak to people in the industry, they say the absolute number one thing holding Britain back is its energy infrastructure. So if I could recolor in the bar, I would...
I'm not saying the audience are wrong. Other opinions are available.
As you said, it is expensive. We're already struggling to get energy to, for example, factories.
Yeah.
So manufacturers complaining that they can't get connected to the grid. And people don't like data centers. There's a huge amount of NIMBYism with it. They don't come with lots and lots of jobs.
No. No.
These sort of boring sheds housing lots of servers. And people don't like the look of them either. So it is quite difficult to get them built. Whereas in the US, you've got a lot more space, and you're seeing companies like Microsoft bring 3 Mile Island nuclear power station back to life, Meta doing the same. It's so fascinating that all the big tech companies are also making these massive energy investments because they need it.
And the scale is such that you need transformative change in your planning rules, in your energy supply, in all the kinds of things that will make a data center work.
Yeah. So you put them in space or maybe in the sea. That's another thing people are doing.
Right.
It's cold and...
Yes.
I think the thing also to note is that kind of, you know, you're absolutely right about the NIMBYism. I think I read recently there were kind of 25 data centers that local residents complained about, and I think that Microsoft has just recently, to your point about Brad Smith, I think said that they're now making these guarantees about when they build a data center that energy prices won't go up, that they will create a certain number of jobs, that, you know, they're realizing that there will be pushback on these things, and, you know, the impact of a data center, there aren't going to be that many jobs actually inside a data center, if anything. They're probably, the lights are off most of the time. Yeah. So, you know, we have to see sort of like the gains might not be made by that community where the data center is located, which I think will mean that there is going to be pushback. So we're going to have to think about, like, how do you reward? It's a bit like, energy prices. Should you reward people who have, whatever, wind farms in their area or solar power in their who agree to have that in their local area? Should there be an incentive given to local communities in order to have a data center built in their area?
Can we talk about the bubble and talk about this, the tech numbers, the way tech is driving the market, the concerns people have about the bubble? I bet Guinness Global Investors gets a phone call or two about this every day. When shall I get out? Some say, Jamie Dimon spoke to the BBC relatively recently and said he was far more worried than others about a serious market correction. Others just dismiss it and say, off we go. Does it keep you up at night, Katie?
No, people ask me about it all the time. I wish I had a better answer, and I wish I knew, because then I'd be a very, very wealthy person. I mean, I didn't think that the market would go as high as it did last year. So Nvidia, which at the start of the year was valued at $3 trillion, by the end was valued at $5 trillion. And I'd never have predicted that. I think perhaps we need to make a difference as well between what's going on with the public companies, so the listed businesses like Meta and Microsoft and Nvidia, which are making a lot of money from AI, and then the private companies like OpenAI and Anthropic, which have these enormous valuations. And the reason they have those valuations is because investors think they're worth that much, essentially. Yeah. But we don't have a look under the bonnet of how these companies do. So American businesses are not like those here in the UK, which when they're private, put their accounts on Companies House and we can have a look at them. We really don't know how they're doing. And so I think it's a big question at the moment, and what analysts in the city I speak to are worried about is this sort of issue of circular deals. So the likes of Nvidia putting money into OpenAI in exchange for buying their chips. Yeah. Does OpenAI really have the money to do that? What sort of revenues are they making? We don't know. And so I think that's why. And then you look at like the likes of Greenland and Grok and all these mad things that keep happening. And it wouldn't take much to perhaps suck investor confidence out of the market.
That circularity, that ecology of these huge companies and the numbers that they are now playing with, does that alone concern you?
Okay, so I think, by the way, Katie's absolutely right to make that distinction between the publicly traded companies and the companies, frankly. I mean, OpenAI basically is like Kaiser Soze in The Usual Suspects. Like, the main character in all of this is off stage. We haven't seen them. We don't know what's going on under the hood. We don't know what's happening with OpenAI's finances. No one knows. I would say, if we were sitting here a year ago, we might say something like, Google's finished, right? Because everyone's going to use, Perplexity for search. Their stock went up 65% in 2025. And I think there are two ways of looking at this. One is, firstly, the Jamie Dimon approach, which is, this is a little bit like, there's a lot of competition in this marketplace right now. It's very easy to switch between these products. We're already seeing it. People are moving away from OpenAI. Gemini's growing. We're seeing sort of like DeepSeek and the open source models, which is a whole other area where I think the US tech companies could be in a lot of trouble if the market is flooded by Chinese open source models, which are 80-85% as good, but are tenth of the price of these things, and that could actually kind of have a real impact on the valuation of the Mag 7. The privately owned AI companies, to Katie's point. What I would say is there's a Jamie Dimon point of view, which is it's very easy to switch between these products. There's competition in that marketplace right now. And what that means is that we all have the ability to move between various products. So it's a bit like going out and buying a can of beans. Like I can walk from my house and go and buy a can of beans in 6 different places, and it's roughly going to be the same price. And if I want to save 10p, maybe I'll go to somewhere other than the other. But the real challenge there is effectively, the marginal price comes down to sort of like zero, and actually the value for those companies is sequestered for all of us, right? So we're all using these products, and actually the valuation of those companies is not significant. There's the other view, which is the Jensen Huang view, which is that there are going to be some huge winners, and that there will be companies that will be worth trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars, and that will effectively have a monopoly. Now, I don't know which way, frankly, I have no idea which way it's going to go, but, I think that we can imagine a world in which, both of those scenarios are possible.
This is obviously not investment advice, but I would say, I think if you believe that AI is going to make us all more productive and more efficient, and thus businesses more productive and more efficient, then it probably does push up stock market values. And we've seen that with what's happened to the FTSE 100 this year. I mean, it's probably likely that company valuations across the board, not just the tech companies that we've been talking about, are going to rise.
I guess there's a secondary question about the bubble. Greg, you say, yes, and you cite Jensen Huang saying there will be companies that make unfeasible amounts of money out of this. Presumably there is a concern that people are also pouring money into companies that will not make money out of this, and that money will simply go down the plug hole. And then you have systemic risk about companies that have had trillions spent and nothing has come out. Katie, is that a concern, or is it too early to say?
So the answer that I hear tech bosses trot out about this is that this happened in the dot-com boom. People made massive investments, and a lot of them didn't work out. But at the end of the day, we all use the internet. I'm afraid I do think there is going to be some sort of, correction is a lovely word to use.
Very polite.
Because things do feel so inflated. But as I say, that's exactly how I felt last year. And things just seem to be going up in quite a terrifying way.
Yeah.
I mean, look, I think that where we are, it's, the analogy that everyone's sort of like using at the moment is like, are we in 1996 or are we in 1999? Like, how close are we? And do people want to get out of the market now? If you got out of Google last year, you do, 65% increase in the market cap of that company. I think that it's possible that there will be a drawdown at some point because, valuations are incredibly high at the moment. But I also think that, it's possible that, this keeps going for 2 or 3 years. Because if we were in 1996, in 1996, we figured out, okay, this internet thing, it's probably going to really help us buy things, and it's probably going to have an effect on the media. And hey, guess what? We can buy plane tickets. But probably what we hadn't seen was the rise of, we definitely hadn't seen the rise of Airbnb or Uber or even YouTube. We couldn't see how those industries are going to completely change.
Or smartphones, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll leave you with an analogy that Jensen Huang gave me when I asked him about the bubble. He called it a build-out.
Build-out, not a bubble.
Go.
That's what we'll go with. Right. Could you briefly tell the 27% of our audience who think that the brain drain might be the biggest obstacle to the UK why they are completely wrong? Or at least address the idea of the brain drain and whether it is a brain drain or a brain surge? Katie?
I feel like we've got a brain drain into London at the moment, particularly London, because I keep hearing about a lot of people in the US who don't want to be there under the Trump regime and thus are moving here as a multicultural, cosmopolitan, fantastic city with incredible tech companies. And we really do have some amazing tech companies here. I think about the likes of Wave, the driverless car business, 11 Labs, the AI audio business, for example. So I think it's the other way.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, and I think that the Trump administration's sort of $100,000 sort of charge for an H-1B visa will be seen as an act of self-harm. It's a tax on talent. I think the UK can offer an alternative to that. We have universities and companies that are growing, elite universities. We have companies that are growing. We also have frankly, as Katie said, like amazing cosmopolitan places to live, and that kind of like nonsense that you see online about London being a hellhole. Like, just come and live here for a couple of years, and you'll see that it's an incredibly fun, robust, cosmopolitan place with elite universities and wonderful museums and fantastic restaurants.
May I ask you about something which you touched upon, and this was the idea that British companies get to a certain size and then go, right, let's sell, and that they don't develop into global behemoths. Is it something that concerns you? Is it something that can change, or is it now so entrenched, because people have been talking about this as long as we've been talking about, frankly, tech, that it's now very hard to shift? Katie, will you kick off?
I don't think it's so entrenched that it's hard to shift. I think there are fundamental issues that are stopping businesses growing here to that scale, mainly funding. Right. So if you look at the likes of Google DeepMind, when they got to a certain size, where did they turn to for their growth capital? And that is a very difficult systemic thing to change. The government is trying to change the rules to make pension funds invest more of their money here in UK risky companies, early stage businesses. I was with an investor the other day, who many of you might know, the Ontario Teachers Pension Plan, based in the same building as Aramco in Mayfair, and they are an enormous investor in early-stage British tech companies, European tech companies, and that really, I think, is where we need to go to with our pension funds if we're going to see a change in the funding of these companies, because a lot of the time, that's what it comes down to. The other issue, of course, is public listings in London, so getting tech companies that grow here to want to stay in London when they float. And if you look at the likes of Revolut, I can't remember its latest valuation, it was completely massive.
It's nuts, yeah.
But that's the sort of business that you would want to float on the London Stock Exchange. It looks very likely that they'll go to the US. So
I'm going to get Greg's thought on this in a moment. Just to remind you, in about 5 minutes, we're going to come to you for your questions. So do prepare those. Greg,
just to be clear, when I said the Revolut valuation was nuts, I don't mean it was insanely high. I just meant that it's a huge success story.
Extraordinary. Yes.
Yeah. Just on that. Kay's absolutely right on that kind of like that growth area. We are really, really good at building early stage companies. We're not so good at scaling them in that kind of like that when they really are building out to that kind of like global size, and the pension reforms I think are really important. At the moment, as far as I understand, is like the UK captures around 15% of value of most technology companies, right? And they do go to the Ontario Teachers Fund, or they go to a private equity company in Australia or a Danish sovereign wealth fund. And I do think that we need to start capturing more value. I think that we need to be more willing to accept risk, and this isn't just the UK. This is Europe as a whole.
When you say we, who is it who needs to be more willing to accept risk?
I think, look, fundamentally, a lot of this comes down to government being the first, sort of like particularly being able to sort of like act as a first customer for a lot of businesses, right, so that they're able to sort of like go to market with the knowledge that the government will be a customer of theirs, and then once government commits, then a lot of private capital will come in. We are really good at venture capital. We don't have the size, obviously, of the scale of what the US has. But if, for instance, and this is an idea I heard last week from a German entrepreneur, is like, we need to be putting together like a fund of funds, like, maybe sort of like with sort of part government capital, part private capital, but we need to think about how we deploy that capital in fast growth businesses when they're at that stage, where they're at that later stage, where they're really able to sort of, go into being a globally significant company.
It's interesting. I mean, our market is just so much smaller than the US, and I don't know about you, I don't think it's an ambition issue. Do you, with founders, with entrepreneurs who are running these companies? No,
definitely not. And I think that's why you see so many of them think, well, I have to go and raise in the valley. So whether you're thinking about, I don't know, Stripe, or I mean, actually, that's not a British company, but two Irish guys could have raised in London. It's just that how quickly can we do that? And I think it's the speed of execution as much as anything else, right? I mean, being able to raise very, very quickly. These people want to be able to move, in weeks, not months, and maybe we just don't have that ability. I don't know. What do you think?
We'll leave it there, and what I want to do now is hear from you, if we may, your questions for our panel. We're going to change the lighting so I can actually see you. Here it goes. Fantastic. And we have people running around with microphones, or at least loping around with microphones. Lady over there.
Hi, thank you so much for talking to us today, Katie and Greg. And my question relates to, when we discuss data sovereignty and national regulation, how does this change our perspective on AI issues that need to be governed arguably on a global scale, such as issues with geopolitical significance, such as like AI being used in misinformation election campaigns, or financial crime being AI facilitated happening offshore? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Who wants to go first? Greg.
Can you just sum up the question for me? I wasn't quite sure sorry, apologies. I didn't quite understand the question.
So in issues that should be arguably governed on a global scale because they're transnational, or bad actors could be acting in one location, right, but then, targeting people in another one.
Well, I guess kind of like we would have signed up to sort of like multilateral agreements, things like financial crime, and also UK law would apply. I think that when we are processing data in the UK, we need to be able to apply UK sort of like law to that, and that is one question around sort of like US companies and ensuring that we maintain control and sovereignty over that data and that information. So I'd say that we apply our own rules, our own standards, and also there are also global standards and global international law that we would apply to that data and that information.
I love the idea of having some sort of NATO, whatever it is, for AI, some global body that would make sure that all of the standards were the same. That's almost what Bletchley Park was aiming at, bringing together the Chinese, Americans, Europeans to talk about this. I just can't see it happening, unfortunately. And so I think we're back really to where we were, or where we are on tech regulation all the time, which is doing it state by state, which, to Johnny's point, when you're talking about tech and services that cross borders, isn't ideal.
No. We got lots and lots of people are watching online, and we have questions from them as well. I'm going to ask you both a tricky one. Which UK AI companies should we be excited about? You should declare any interests you have. Is there anything there are companies that you are keeping an eye on that you are excited about, Katie?
I mentioned Wave, the driverless car business, which got $1 billion of backing from SoftBank and has investments from Nvidia and Microsoft. I also mentioned 11 Labs, which is an audio AI company. So it ingests a little bit of your voice, and then it can read forevermore, sounding like you. And you said, I think a friend of yours had a small investment in 11 Labs.
Yes, and he's doing rather well.
He's now doing rather well.
Yeah.
And then others, the Synthesia, which does video AI. So it makes, you could make Greg basically do a video even if he wasn't there. So it's quite cool. And Poly AI, which is another voice AI company. So Amazon's Alexa was developed in Cambridge, and so we've got a real expertise around voice AI in this country.
Lovely, thank you, Greg.
I'm going to go for a couple of healthcare companies. First one is Isomorphic Labs, which was rolled out of Google DeepMind, which is doing drug discovery, if I'm correct. And there's a very, very early stage company as well, sort of full transparency, that my friend is the founder of, along with Thomas Heatherwick. And it's basically, if you can imagine, a stick that you pee on for a pregnancy test. It's a stick that you pee on, and it will give you early indicators of lots of chronic diseases. And it could be quite a game changer in the healthcare industry.
Fabulous. I'm going to come to the audience in a moment, back to the audience, and I'm going to take you in a group of 2 or 3 questions. Hang on 1 second, because we've got a lovely question about framing here from those watching online. And thank you very much for your questions coming into us. Is it a good idea to frame this as an AI race between the biggest global superpowers? What, if anything, do we miss with that framing? Greg, you're nodding so vigorously, I'm going to let you answer first.
I was just pretending to have some insight. I think it's not helpful to define it as a race, because if we define it as a race, then there's going to be, clearly just one winner, and it's the kind of the Jensen version of how it's going to play out. I think that there are lots of places that smaller countries can play within the stack. I think the UK can compete probably on frontier models with the right infrastructure, the right data, the right investment. We're a long way from that right now, but we could compete. I think where we can compete is on the application layer. We are very, very good at building products, that sort of sit above that kind of like that structural underpinning. So I think that, if we're talking about sort of like winners and losers, the UK could be a big winner in very different ways to say the way that China. Like China's already won, frankly, on energy. They have electrified their grid pretty much. I know there's a lot of coal being burned in China still, but their price of energy is half that of the United States at the moment. So, they have won in one particular way. I think the UK could win if we sort of use our health data, for instance, that we have within the NHS, and we could win by finding cures to chronic diseases, using our kind of like the talent that we can attract here, to Katie's point, in terms of that inflow of talent, and we become winners in that way. So I think there's different ways of framing it.
Katie, races, winners, losers, beloved of headline writers. Are they useful ideas?
It might not be useful, but I'm afraid it's a fact.
Right.
We are in a race. Tech is heavily geopolitical. This is the most powerful technology of our lifetime, so I'm afraid it is inevitable. And you see that on the US's limitations on the exports of Nvidia's semiconductors, for example. That's why they're putting their curbs in place, because everybody is trying to win here. And up until now, the US has been trying to give us a helping hand in that with its investment into the UK. Whether that changes after Greenland,
that stopped
I don't know.
At tea time on Saturday. Right, let's get your questions, please. Thank you. And I'm going to take them in a group of three. I see a hand there. Gentleman, I think, there. Thank you. And after him, another gentleman here. Sir.
You mentioned briefly about the difference between AI regulation in the US, UK, and the EU. I just want to get your perspective on whether you thought it was a help or hindrance being inside the EU to become an AI superpower.
Thank you. We will come to that in a second. Help or hindrance. Lovely. And, sir, can we get a microphone to the gentleman here on the edge?
My question continues on the theme of safety and regulation. The one thing that Britain seems to be world class in is its AI Safety Institute, or now it's AI Security Institute. There are reports that frontier labs from around the world are coming to do red team testing and so on with the specialist knowledge that we have there. My question is, in the words of the famous hockey player Wayne Gretzky, we should be skating to where the puck will be. Isn't it possible that in a few years' time we're going to be all reeling from an AI 9/11 or an AI Chernobyl, some even worse disaster from AI than we've experienced that? And at that stage, the public is going to be demanding, we're fed up with cute AI and slick AI. We're going to want trustworthy and robust and safe AI. Shouldn't we be building on that asset and getting our AI ready for that coming phase transition in public attitudes?
Thank you very much, sir. And sir.
Hi there. Mine was basically a question about talent. So we're heavily dependent on the US models and infra currently. I've worked in the space for 3 years. It's the only models I've ever used. Mistral is, you mentioned Mistral. It's very small. They don't have a huge amount of infra. My question is, if our relationship with the US sours, where do we put all our talent to use? There won't be the models to use. We won't have the infra to deploy. What then?
Thank you very much indeed. Right, let's start.
It's an intelligence test, remembering.
It's good. No, it's good. No, I have my pen. The first question was is it a help or, and I paraphrase, a help or hindrance at this point to be outside of the EU? Katie?
I hate this question because I don't know enough about how the rules worked pre-Brexit to be able to say whether we'd been able to set our own laws. It has certainly been very helpful for us to be able to do that. because we have managed to create this rather sensible, I think, halfway house. But I don't know, I'm afraid, whether that would have been possible pre-Brexit.
Yeah, I'm the same as Katie. Frankly, I don't know enough about it. What I would say is that having left the EU has put us in a position where we have to act in a certain way, which is that, you know, we have to develop sovereign AI. It has made us think about, you know, risk and security differently, and it's made us think that we have to really, you know, create a UK sort of stamped version of this. I think that maybe where it's not helping is this kind of reindustrialization of defense that needs to happen. But, you know, obviously we cooperate with our friends in the EU in all kinds of ways through NATO. So, frankly, I don't know enough about that to really be able to answer the question properly.
Lovely. Okay. The second question was about AI safety, and managed to use the phrase AI Chernobyl and AI 9/11. Thank you.
Yeah.
And the question of building towards safety rather than waiting for the outrage that follows an AI-inspired disaster. Katie?
I mean, you're right, the AI Safety Institute, Security Institute here is very well respected and has spawned others in other countries. I was quite heartened, actually, by Britain's response to everything that happened with Grok recently, which, I mean, it's not really a Chernobyl, but just in terms of AI going rogue, and how we dealt with it, that was, I think, quite sensible. I think the problem always is, and this moves on to the next gentleman's question, these companies are based outside our jurisdiction. So they come to the Safety Institute at the moment willingly. And I find it frustrating as a journalist, because when you get the reports from the Institute, they don't actually say which company has done what. So you get a report saying these are the problems that we've discovered in the models, but not, you know, this is OpenAI, blah, blah, blah. If they stop doing that, how do you deal with it? And that is, you know, to the next gentleman's point about us not having our own frontier AI companies here, a major issue.
Let's go to that next question, and that was about using US models. For those that don't know, there may be some. Can you just explain what you mean by a frontier company, a frontier model, and why that is so important for what the gentleman was talking about, I think, about the use of talent here in the UK? Greg?
Healthcare this evening, and I do think that is one area where we could sort of like think about ways of deploying UK sovereign AI. But you know, it's almost too much of an ask, I think, at the moment for us to have like to be able to compete on that level. It does seem like the US and China are way ahead of us right now. However, I do think that what we can do is think about when we are deploying US companies, sort of like infrastructure in the UK, that we make sure that like that infrastructure has, you know, it co-locates with UK talent, co-locates with UK R&D, and it is applying UK law and UK values and UK standards to what's being developed.
I think the worrying thing for me, to your point, is what we've learned from Trump is he doesn't believe in rules. And so even if you put these things in place, there is no guarantee of any of that. And actually, you're totally right. We don't have our own models. Mistral is a small French company, although I understand some people do really like using its products, and certainly it's getting massive backing. But I think it's something that's really, really worrying, and we need to sit up and pay attention. And it's very striking that Europe is doing something about it. And at the moment, Britain isn't.
Yeah, and it's interesting also that a lot of US startups are now using Chinese open source models rather than the US closed models. What that means basically.
Why are they doing that, Greg?
Cost.
Right, okay.
They're not as good as the US closed models, but they're doing it so like Andreessen Horowitz recently, big VC fund in San Francisco, announced that 80% of their startups are using Chinese open weight models. Brian Chesky, who's the founder of Airbnb, recently announced that they're using the Chinese Alibaba model. Was it Quen, I think it's called? And that kind of like sent shivers down the spine of a lot of people in the Valley, because, it does mean, therefore, that, fundamentally, if, a lot of the build-out is happening in Chinese models, A, do we know what's going on inside that? And B, most importantly, like, for people in the Valley, like, will that affect the valuations of US companies? If, you can get sort of like the sort of like close to the same value for 10% of the cost, that really does have an effect on the market value of the US model, closed models.
It's kind of mad, right? We've spent years in this country stripping Huawei's infrastructure out of our telecommunications network, and it's cost BT an arm and a leg to do that. So we're saying the alternative here is pushing people towards Chinese models. I mean, this is all about geopolitics, and I think to a lot of people, including the government, that probably wouldn't be acceptable.
Yeah, and I think maybe it sort of like feeds into a bigger point around sort of the way that the world is now thinking about, like, what does it look like to sort of like rethink around, the US effectively not being a player that is reliable and trustworthy. So you look around, look at the way that sort of like China has adapted its supply chains. Its imports are basically flat, but at the same time, it's now reduced its imports from the US from around 17% to around 10%. And it's now exporting more to the EU and exporting more to Asia. So what will happen is if you do try and sort of like shut down your markets and you impose tariffs and you create a kind of like a world that is not sort of global, people will find a way around it. And China already has, India has, Brazil will. Basically the US is creating the conditions where people would just go around them.
Let's take another question that we received online, and then we'll come to the audience in a second. How much will the significant promised tech investments made when President Trump was here really come to pass? Subsidiary question, will this investment help save Rachel Reeves's job? That may be beyond you, I don't know. There were lots of big numbers thrown about, and I know you and my colleagues at the BBC were busy going about what were the new pledges, what were the old pledges, when does the money come? What did you make of those numbers, Katie?
At the time, I was very positive about them, actually, and quite heartened that these big tech companies, Microsoft, Nvidia, OpenAI, were making such major investments here. And a lot of those investments, as well as in data centers, were creating more jobs, expanding their offices, because they already employ lots and lots of people here. However, those pledges were put on ice in December, as I think there were some issues when we were negotiating about an agricultural tariff. So I'm not even sure if they currently stand, as we are, 20 days into January or whatever. So poor Rachel Reeves.
Greg, thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, just going back to that kind of like, drawing a parallel with China, like Trump's, I think, 17 times he's changed the tariff rules with China since so-called Independence Day. Liberation Day. Thank you very much, Liberation Day. So it's that uncertainty, I think, just means that it pushes the UK and other nations to a place where, the US is becoming an unreliable, well, it's becoming reliable in its unreliability. And what that means is that we have to start thinking about, what are the other ways that we can do these things in order to grow our economy.
Lovely. Let's go back to the audience. Gentleman at the front here, lady in white-ish, pale, I'll go with anyway. First of all, gentleman here, lady in the white there, and then lady in darker clothing in front of her. Sir.
Thank you very much for what you've taught us. My question is a slightly tricky one. I can understand how AI can create a better search engine. I can understand how it might enable Waymo and Wave to conquer the world with autonomous cars, and perhaps help in medicine. But I have also had exposure to people who've argued quite strongly that one of the problems with AI is that it's hallucinatory. And it will come up with an answer that it tells you this is the answer, and actually it's only 95% right, and that's a huge problem. So I've got slightly two questions to you. One, do you yourself think there's any merit in the being a bit cautious about AI line of thinking? And secondly, what are the biggest practical things that are going to affect my life? I'm hoping to live for another 20 years.
So do we. Thank you very much, sir. The lady in white or pale, that's right, madam.
Thank you. So my question was about what you mentioned earlier about, the AI, when you mentioned about Grok and saying the AI went rogue. It's not the AI itself that goes rogue, it's the users, but that made me think, how much is being spent, or do you think how much more should we regulate the use, and how much education has to go in this, especially for younger generations who are growing up with this and need to learn how to use it in the right way, or not in the right way, but in a healthy and safe way. So my question was about that, how much is being done around this subject?
Thank you. Thank you very much. And madam. Ooh, almost on.
Thank you very much for this very interesting discussion. We've talked a lot about AI as a general use technology, but it's also dual use technology. So I'm curious to hear how you consider Britain's evolution with regards to AI in the military/defense sphere. Helsing is obviously becoming a rather important player in this regard, but do you consider it as a serious competitor to US companies like Palantir? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for those three questions. The first one referenced ghosts and hallucinations and had two questions there. Is there a need for much greater caution when I think it comes out to what is brought out by AI, what is the results of queries to AI? And secondly, what will be that big impact over the next 20 years? Easy, really. Greg?
I think we need to make a distinction between generative AI, which is, has a lot of hallucinations because it's trained on all the information on the internet, and if all the information on the internet is not correct, anyone can go on, you can go on Reddit. So those, sure, it's trained on, amazing books like Katie's, but it's also trained on, a lot of nonsense that's posted by, state actors from Russia. So that's one piece of AI. The AI that's controlling a Waymo is very different. And you can just look at the number of times that a Waymo has had an accident, and it's like 95% less than when a human being is driving a car. So I think it's really about the types of AI that we're applying in different situations. So I think Waymo this year did something like 1 million paid rides in the United States with almost no accidents whatsoever. So that application clearly is safe, but I agree with you, generative AI, there is still plenty of room for, errors, but it's going to improve, it's going to get better. I mean, I'm sure that when you're using it, and certainly when I'm using it, I'm beginning to notice that there are step changes quite regularly in how much better it's getting.
And your punt on the significant impact for individuals over the next 20 years?
Oh gosh, yes. Well, good question. Look, I think that probably your doctor is going to have an AI that they're going to be using as a companion. They can't keep up possibly with the latest research, the latest treatments. And I think that what will hopefully get, it's still, the NHS is not, the data is not kind of linked up. If you go and see your GP, he recommends or she recommends that you go to a consultant, and then the consultant maybe, the data hasn't come over. So I think that just that linking up of data and that ability to sort of like diagnose things much more quickly will become something that you will benefit from, hopefully.
Katie, do you want to add?
It's a lovely question. Yes, chatbots hallucinate, and when I talk to mine, I always ask it to source its answers, because otherwise I don't always trust where it got the information from. And I've spent a long time experimenting with what promotes, generates the best answers. So I think sometimes talking to it regularly helps. And then in terms of improvements to your life, I think you might be able to, say, book a restaurant, engaging with a chatbot customer service agent without wanting to throttle it at the end of the conversation.
Okay, first world problems. Let's talk about regulation of use and education of users. Katie, how much is there now in terms of education of users beyond the most basic intent?
I mean, I've got an 8-year-old and an 11-year-old, and I don't think they're learning about this that much at school, actually. No. They learn about online safety, but not so much use of chatbots. And it comes back to the point I made earlier about regulation always chasing tech. It's an issue Ofcom has. They're now implementing the online safety bill and all of the content on the internet. They are yet to have to regulate what goes on inside chatbots. And I think that is coming down the track, right? So if your child is engaging with a chatbot and has a difficult conversation at the moment, who is responsible for that? If the chatbot says something,
and being the possessor of, is it a 9-year-old and an 11-year-old? 8-year-old and an 11-year-old. Yeah. Are you concerned about their relationship with, and we use the sort of AI as if it is one thing, and it's so obviously not from the discussion we've had, but are you concerned about the world that they grow up in, and is there education guidance that you think will do anything apart from go out of date within months?
I'm excited for them in many ways. I'm very often shocked by how closely their education resembles my grandmother's in terms of the things that primary school seems to emphasize as important, spellings and handwriting, for example. I'm sure the school system could do a lot more to bring them up to speed. I hear friends with older children now questioning a lot whether they should go to university, and many more people wanting to do sort of apprenticeships at 18 because they can't see the point in taking on that debt in an uncertain world where you don't know where the jobs are going to be, frankly, in a few years.
Yeah. Greg?
Yeah, no, I think that point around sort of apprenticeships is a really good one. And one sort of like suggestion that I've heard mooted is that basically degree and apprenticeships almost become kind of like fused, so that like people who are doing degrees spend some time in industry gets a talent pipeline, people who are doing their degrees get sort of like some exposure to what it's like to work in the real world. I think it's very, very hard for young people now to figure out, what jobs will be of value in the coming, years. I think that probably, we are going to see sort of like a lot of automation in, areas like obviously back office, financial services, insurance, all the obvious stuff. But I also think that like there will be, new jobs that we probably don't know. In 1996, we didn't know there was going to be a job called an app developer. We probably don't, there are jobs kind of probably going to be created at the moment that is, an autonomous truck fleet, whatever, controller. So that there are going to be lots of new jobs that we can't quite imagine yet. But I think that fundamentally, if I was advising my daughters who are in their 20s and don't want my advice any longer, clearly, I would be saying to them, it's fundamentally it's about human skills, which is empathy and understanding, the world and creativity are going to be, you can apply those in whatever area you're moving into, whether it's healthcare or whether it's finance or whether it's security.
Do you believe that there needs to be primary, secondary, tertiary, who knows, a specific education of individuals in AI, or is it folded more generally into using things online?
I think having an understanding of AI is a really, really important thing, because I think we need to build trust around it as well as build skills around it. I think that where we'll see it deployed really helpfully in education is understanding that people learn in different ways and at different rates. And that they will understand that sort of like someone in a classroom is maybe not learning, as quickly as some of their peers, and their peer on the other side is incredibly bored because they've already mastered this. So I think that we'll see, us being able to use sort of like personalization learning skills that will enable sort of like everyone to sort of like level up.
We have another poll for you. You can see the QR code there. It is our final poll of the evening. How confident are you that Britain can become an AI superpower? And the answers range from very to not confident at all, with 2 in between. So do vote, and we'll see how quickly the results come through. Can I ask you just a quickie on its pessimism and optimism? Because there is an awful lot of both around AI. How do you approach it? Do you approach it as something that is this enormous opportunity, or do you see it, as so many people do, as a sort of terrifying threat?
I think it's really exciting, and I'm really enjoying experimenting with it. Right. And as I said to you in the green room earlier, I used it to help write my book. So I created a model ingesting all of the vast amounts of information that I had from court cases and judgments and all sorts of earnings calls. And it was invaluable. Right. And it enabled me to write the book far more quickly and painlessly than I would otherwise have done. And I've just found it also invaluable for research. It finds things on the internet that I would not find myself. And I'm really, really enjoying it.
An enthusiast, Greg?
I'm optimistic that in the UK we can really use it in order to sort of like drive growth and find new kind of exciting sort of like ways of deploying it that we probably don't even understand right now. I think we need the right regulation. I think we need the right sort of like guardrails. We need the right level of investment. But I think that, you know, as a entrepreneurial, dynamic country, this is a real opportunity. And I think that it's, you know, it's very easy to sort of like look at the challenges. And yes, you know, we don't have the data centers. And yes, we need to build out, you know, the capital inflows. But I think that, you know, it's kind of a generational opportunity. And we can really, if we grasp it and we see it as a national mission, I think it's very, very exciting. And I really do believe that, you know, that the level of innovation and, okay, one fact, like the UK has won, you know, more Nobel Prizes, you know, per capita than pretty much anywhere in the world. And if we can harness that kind of, 19 per 10 million people, the US is 11 per 10 million people. So I think that if we can harness some of that can-do, that expertise, and that, that drive, we can do something special.
Apparently, if they gave one to President Trump, he wouldn't have gone after Greenland. But there we go.
Let's just ponder very briefly, if we could. We are going to wrap up very soon. The answers here that you gave, I'd like to doff my cap to the 35% that said they were unsure. Nothing more fabulous than people being honest about their own ignorance or unsureness. But 41% fairly confident that Britain can become an AI superpower, as previously discussed. A quick rumination. Do you think this is because of what you've said in the last hour and a half? Katie?
No, they all live in the UK or here, presumably, so they see how great it is. I think the one major thing as discussed that's holding us back is the hardware and the infrastructure, but that doesn't stop fantastic companies growing and operating here.
This is an intelligence squared, audience. Come on, they're intelligent. They're definitely not square. No, I think that anyone who's kind of engaged with the kind of content Intelligence Squared produces knows that this is a generational opportunity because we are able in this country to really sort of like innovate and come up with ideas and drive things forward. So I'm so happy to see that. What was it 47%? 41%. 41. Pretty good. That's a
not gloomsters and doomsters here. There are several people and organisations that need to be thanked. Guinness Global Investors, first of all, for all the help that they give in establishing this economic outlook. Many, many thanks to them. Intelligence Squared, who have obviously organised this, but most importantly, Katie and Greg, for everything you've given us this evening. Thank you very much.